and this session, the closing is going to be quite interesting. There are a number of reasons for that, which will reveal itself in the coming minutes. Distinguished participants, speakers, colleagues, friends, and ladies and gentlemen, in this session, we are going to reflect on what we have learned, what we have discussed, and which we have debated in the last 2 days, yesterday and today. And we have distinguished panel members here who are going to, some of them going to reflect on what we have discussed, and some of them are going to tell us what the way forward could be from here, what we will be doing after this, what is there in store for us. And just to reflect back on myself also a little bit on that, personally I found this forum deliberations incredibly rewarding, but it was extremely tiring too. I think for many of you the same thing. But I don't want to share my experience here more, and without losing much time, I would like to start with, what are the take-home messages and some of the questions that we have raised, and those questions that we have refined over in the yesterday and today. And here we have to do that, to do those reflections. Here we have Dr. Louis Lebel with us. And Dr. Louis Lebel is the director of Unit for Social and Environmental Research at Chiang Mai University. And probably he doesn't need any introduction here in this region. He has such a long experience here. And also, I think, his experience cannot be counted in years. And I think I must be learning ABCD when he had already started pondering on the issues that we are talking about today. So without losing much time, I would like to invite Dr. Louis Lebel to reflect on some of the key issues that came out of this forum. Thank you. Dr. Louis Lebel.
So I've got the really easy task of reflecting on 2 days of overwhelming number of talks, panel speeches, corridor conversations, and that's quite a challenge. But I'm going to focus on content and not on format, and I really just have 4 topics I want to just highlight. So it's not going to cover everything that was covered in every session, but 4 things. So I'm going to be a little bit critical, but I hope I'm constructive. What is adaptation? Adaptation to climate change is usually defined as an adjustment in ecological and social systems in response to observed or expected changes in climate and their impacts. Although reducing adverse impacts is what most people emphasize, it can also be about taking advantage of opportunities. Adaptation to climate change can be about building adaptive capacity, or it can be about transforming that capacity into particular specific actions. Part of the building this response capacity is maintaining and building social and ecological resilience. Another part that we didn't talk about so much in this meeting is also about investing in innovations with the potential to transform systems along more sustainable pathways. The main take-home message I got from this workshop is that we learn more when we are specific about the units of analysis and action, when we really answer carefully the question of the adaptation of what or by whom, to what and for what. Unpacking adaptation that way is really quite an important topic, but I'm not going to say more about it today. What is mainstreaming? This was, one of the the catchphrase for this particular workshop. Mainstreaming usually refers to the integration of adaptation policy and measures into ongoing planning and decision-making processes. The notion of mainstreaming in many ways is common sense. It's like saying that climate is just one of the many things we need to worry about. We have to worry about other things as well. And it needs to be responded to in a coherent way. It also is about starting with policies and practices that you already have in place rather than thinking totally new. Mainstreaming, many people argue, also makes sense because it might be cheaper. No? It makes better use of scarce resources and might reduce conflicts between contradictory policies. In planning processes, which is, a lot of our discussion in mainstreaming was about this, it could be relevant to quite a few different phases. It could be relevant to those first steps when you're assessing, to much further down when you're talking about implementation. It can take place at different levels. We heard in the local government section, it can be about local government, it can be about national levels, it can be about community-based actions. And so mainstream is not only done by governments, it's also undertaken by other actors. In these last 2 days, we heard a bit about how, about what works, about key intervention points, about tactics, especially in the corridor conversations rather than necessarily in the panels. But I really hope that in the next forum, we hear even more from practitioners. We hear more from mayors. We hear more from civil society organizations doing things in different places about their experiences with efforts to mainstream adaptation. I want to know more about the challenges they faced, what institutional barriers they had to circumvent, and maybe even some of the side benefits they discovered of taking the mainstream adaptation approach. But mainstreaming is also a policy discourse. And I put it to you, it's becoming quite a powerful one. On the opening day, the Minister of Science and Technology in Thailand, Virashai Viramitikun, told us tellingly that adaptation can also be used to meet the development needs of our countries. The idea of mainstreaming, he told us, sounds very promising, and I think many people share that view. Today, Joey Salcida told us eloquently that adaptation is an instrument for development. But he also told us that our Calamity Fund is now called the Adaptation Fund. One of the consequences of being elevated into a policy discourse is co-option to serve multiple and divergent agendas. Nobody's against integration. Nobody's against poverty alleviation. But is mainstreaming adaptation really equivalent to disaster management? Is it really the same thing, or are there other things we need to think about as well? Do we need to think more about the long term? Mainstreaming, in my view, there's some dangers with that word. It's what I call a cloaking word. It's a kind of a figure of speech that hides some real complexity, in which there's still many options and decisions to make, and negotiations and politics are necessary. Mainstreaming has a sort of technocratic language to it. It's just like integration. So there's some risks in this mainstreaming language. Is mainstreaming a panacea? Does it answer all our questions? I made this little picture after listening on the first day. Mainstreaming the responses to climate change adaptation as an issue when it's raised, there's quite a few things that can happen. Some people will just ignore it. There's no need to pay any attention to it all. There's also a possibility of segregation and exclusion. Mainstreaming, that integration, is really only one of 3 or 4 things that can happen. Is mainstreaming always the right approach? Are there certain types of issues, maybe situations or institutional contexts, in which mainstreaming is unnecessary, counterproductive, or otherwise unlikely to be worthwhile? My feeling is that people at this meeting didn't have much to say about this, but I think it's important that if we're going to take mainstreaming seriously, I think we should also be a little bit more critical about how we use the word. But I'll have a go. At first cut, I'm going to suggest that mainstreaming is less important when these conditions hold, when you have high certainty and the risks being considered are relatively independent of other factors in development and can be addressed with discrete target actions with few side effects. There might not be many situations like that, but there are some. I think in these situations, side streaming might be a better approach. So I'm hoping in future forums we look a little bit more critically at mainstreaming as an idea. The second theme I wanted to discuss was knowledge. I found that in this workshop, some of the more interesting panel discussions and questions from the floor were often about what we know and don't know, about the role of science, about the role of community experts, and the challenges of applying what somebody knows and turning it into action. Now, that for me, the platform has generated quite a bit of excitement, but the real issue is how do we make it work? We're not just sharing knowledge, but how do we actually link knowledge to action? My sense is that we really need better ways of thinking about the relationships between knowledge and action, between science and policy, and between research and practice. Let me explain using some sort of common verbal images. In my view, the knowledge required in pursuits of adaptiveness, just like sustainability, rarely come down some pipe, from a laboratory or a policy think tank. You turn on the tap and suddenly you get the great ideas. Now, farmers and water managers don't keep doing their out-of-date, their primitive practices just because they haven't read the latest extension officer brochure or haven't read the latest article on hydrology in climate reviews. More often than not, I put it to you, the knowledge that is needed and useful for adapting sustainably under a changing climate is going to be co-produced, it's going to be negotiated, and it's going to be tangled up in doing stuff. It's not separate from doing, from taking actions, from allocating water in an irrigation field. Knowledge systems for adaptation are not like computer networks. They're not like bits of plumbing. Those images, that end of the pipe images, I think is misleading, and I think it's causing us some problems when we think strategically about communication. The connections and relationships between knowledge and action are much more varied. And they include places, they include places where people meet. They include places where people share ideas. They can include mobile phones and websites. But they're also about where people work together, where they collaborate, where they join together, where learning occurs. And power is exercised too. People take authority from what they say, from what they believe. Another element of this knowledge theme, I think, that came up in this last 2 days, really quite strikingly, is the issue of uncertainty. Climate change is real, and it's an important challenge, and there are many parts of it which we are really quite certain about. It's not that everything is uncertain. But for some dimensions, for some variables, if you want to know if there's going to be more rainfall in Chiang Mai 30 years from now, or things like that, we actually may be not very certain what it's going to be like. And for some variables, if we keep pushing CO2 emissions higher and higher, the chances of climate surprise, the chances of ice sheets melting, etc., go up even further. So as we project, it's not prediction, but as we project and try to imagine what climate is going to be like in the future, we're actually going to be less and less certain. So in this situation, communicating is quite difficult, isn't it? I mean, as scientists, we find it hard to communicate. We don't really know what's going to happen in 2030 to rainfall, but we know quite a lot about temperature. We know things about evaporation. We know things about other things. New and different kinds of strategies are needed. I put some examples on this table. I think in this workshop, I'm not going to read through them, but we talked a fair bit in some of the financing panels and that about no regret strategies. Things that are a good idea to do no matter what. You just do them anyway. But there are other kinds of strategies, and we haven't given enough thought to them. And if you're going to be dealing with uncertainty that isn't going to go away, you can't wish it away. A better scaling down of a better climate model, better scenario, it's just not going to solve some of these uncertainty problems. We need to use these kind of strategies. Uncertainties are also important for thinking about how we link knowledge and action, because they make building trust between different communities and fostering learning even more important than usual. If you're talking about uncertain things and you have new understanding, the people you're working with have to trust you. They can trust you because you say it's uncertain. They appreciate your honesty. You don't bluff your way through. To get that kind of relationship, you don't get it by sending off your report, to the minister. It just doesn't happen that way. It's not